Hey, today's topic is just going to be about who I think were the best late game players of StarCraft 2 history. I'll go through it race by race, and I think the most complicated one to pick out is Zerg. And the reason for that is because there isn't an out and out best Zerg late game player in all respects. So, for instance, I'll give a few examples. The two I can think of are Snoot. Snoot is, I think, the best foreigner, actually the best ZVP late game player, despite the fact that he's a foreigner, and that usually like excludes them off of those lists just because the Koreans have by and far proven to be better in most aspects. But for Snoot, I think he is or was the best late game ZVP player we've ever seen in the entire history of StarCraft 2. Obviously, I'll ignore the Broodlord Infestor part just because, it's Broodlord Infestor. But beyond that, I think he's the guy who really pushed the Swarm Host meta into the game. Like, there have been Swarm Host players, but there have never been any as good as Snoot. And he basically forced the entire, he forced everybody to play his game when it came to Protoss. And basically, Protoss players who played him eventually came to the realization I have to kill this guy, or I have to like cut every corner to beat him in the late game. Like, those were the two options. And obviously Hearthstone did the first option where he just cheesed him out. Smart of Hearthstone, I think he's a pretty smart player. Whereas Hero was like, nah, fuck this, I will play super greedy. And then he played super greedy, and then you got those super long ass games at IEM San Jose where Snoot, despite the fact that Hero cut every corner to get ahead of Snoot was still putting up a hell of a fight. He was still showing like he understood the positioning, the late game, of how like the game shifts in terms of strategy as the further he progressed into the game, and he understood like the late game compositions to a higher degree, and he was way more patient than any other Zerg player we've probably ever seen in this particular matchup. And so I give the nod to Snoot for that. I don't think there's anybody comparable to him in that respect. On top of that, of course, I think he's one of the few guys who like reinvented his game. So after like the Swarm Host got nerfed, he switched up to like that Roach Hydra like onion style he was trying to run, and it was very effective. So overall, I'd say I think he's probably beat the most Protoss players in the late game with his Zerg, the most high end. So like Rain, Classic, Hero, those guys. So I think if you're just talking about ZVP late game, I'd probably give the nod to Snoot. For CVT though, there's two guys you can give the nod to. One is Buell, in terms of anti-mech, and there's an argument to be made as to whether or not Rogue is better anti-mech right now as compared to Buell, but I give it to Buell because there were less tools to use in HOTS compared to LOTV for anti-mech play. So because of that, you have to say he did it, and he did it with less tools. Therefore, Buell is a better mech player than Rogue. That's my reasoning for that. And he did it at the very end of HOTS. He was an incredibly gritty sort of late game player, and he did actually make a bunch of mistakes, but like it felt like you were watching him evolve and learn through this horrible mech like late game. He was forced to endure as to how to play it out, and then that's why he was very good. I will say Rogue showed a very good understanding of it back then too, but he was never able to like beat innovation in like a best of X series compared to like Buell did. So I give the nod to Buell for that. But if we're talking about like Bio versus Zerg late game, I give the nod to Life. I think Life is still the best Zerg player to have ever done it. Maybe that's an unpopular opinion, I don't know, but Life is, in terms of late game, he's like one of the few players where he doesn't necessarily play it like others, where like I've pointed out to like the patience and positioning and all that stuff. Life was a guy who's like, it doesn't really matter about that shit. What matters is the amount of chaos you can create, the amount of opportunities from that chaos you can create, and then forcing a situation where you understand the game better than the opponent understands the game. That was what Life's entire game plan was about, and that's why he's like, I still think he's tactically the best Zerg player we've ever seen in StarCraft 2, and his tactical revolution in 2012 was one of the most important what was one of the most important in terms of the evolving meta of the entire game. So that's life, but like I said, that's only a very specific avenue of life's play. And then we've had Snoot, and then we've had Beal. And overall, I'd have to say, I think on average, just in terms of a player who's good in all respects, I'd give it to Dark. I think Dark understands late game at a fairly high level through all the matchups, but like he does get outshined in those specific instances by those like 3 players I named earlier. So it's a very strange situation to look at. And then now we'll go to Protoss, and I think Protoss has a pretty clear answer. It's Rain. For those who don't know, since he's retired, Rain is a GSL champion. He's also an OSL champion, one of the all-time great Protoss players. He is the one who solved PvP, I guess. That's the way I'd say it. Like, this is a guy who figured out the exact unit composition you want, how to get to it, how to transition out of like the various like rock, paper, scissors that was early PvP, which was like Phoenix beats Immortal, beats Gateway, beats like Blink. It was like a very complicated thing, which beats Blink, which beats Phoenix. But then like it also reverses another way depending upon the very specific minute details of the situation. So that's what made PvP extraordinarily complex in Wings of Liberty. And Rain was the guy who solved it. Rain was the guy everybody looked to. Rain was the guy every Protoss, I swear to God, they all stole his builds. They all studied him like a fucking hawk because he understood Protoss at a higher level than every other Protoss at that time. And like his overarching philosophy was very similar to Snoot in the sense that he believed that he was the best player in the late game. So he'd be completely willing to handicap himself in the early game or the mid game. He'd be like, yeah, go ahead, make those economic cuts. Go ahead, try to attack me early. Doesn't matter. I will get to the late game. I will win. And credit to Rain, he actually did do this for a long period of his career. Like, there's only like a few guys who beat him during that time. Like, besides the Broodlord Infestor shit, was like MVP did it, but MVP is MVP. Like, what can you expect? And overall, I'd say like in terms of PvP, PvZ, and PvT, I think Rain was the best there ever was at late game decision making, how to get to the late game, the unit compositions, and how to set up the fights. Like, he was an absolute monster in that respect. And then the final race, Terran, I think this one's really obvious. It's Taesa. And Taesa obviously is a strange answer, I guess, just because I don't think a lot of people respect Taesa as much as I do for his late game play. But I think Taesa understood. Taesa was like that Bruce Lee quote, "Be like water, my friends." Like, because water can be fast, it can be hard, it can be slow. Like, it can like form and shift and change, and that's what Taesa was about. Like, Taesa was often mistaken for a standard Terran player, and I think that's like a gross misinterpretation of who Taesa was as a player, because Taesa was, it only seems like he's using the same standard builds, but how he how he thinks about the game is clearly very different from every other Terran player, because every other Terran player has a timing. He has a time where he's like, fuck it, I am going out there, I am kicking the shit out of the other player, I don't give a fuck anymore. Like, parade pushes, like all-ins, the eventual mech max out, like, these are all moments where other Terran players will push out. Taesa was a guy who he would push out, but he wouldn't go all the way. He'd just be on the edges of your territory, just like taunting you into attacking into him. And if he didn't do that, then he'd take another position on the map that was critical, whether that be another base or whether that be denying you your base. And that's what Taesa was about. And Taesa was incredibly frustrating for foreigners and for Koreans in weekender tournaments. And I actually think there's like a funny case where Taesa's existence probably ruined a bunch of different players' like overarching careers just because he was so good at weekenders. And all right, I'll explain it in 3 details, I guess. In TVZ, there's two there's two series I want you to look at. One of them is Taesa versus Su at BlizzCon 2015. This was right after Su had gone to the GSL final, so you knew he was legit. Su had also beaten Flash and had lost Innovation, so he was like right up there. And people were saying like Taesa was gonna fucking die. He was just gonna get bombed out by Su, but obviously didn't happen. Taesa won, and it's a very interesting sort of parallel here, because Su, in his series against Flash, he lost 30 drones early on, and then he made a comeback and won. In this particular series, Su gets super ahead of Taesa, but he is unable to close out against Taesa because Taesa is making much better late game decisions than Flash did relative to their games, and he's basically just taunting Su the entire time. He's like, okay, go ahead, attack me, and Su was just thinking in his head, well, I'm like up 10k, like what's the worst that could happen? But like Taesa constantly like forced Su into attacking him, making these bad trades, and then afterwards, like after like the fight settles down, you realize, oh, Taesa is in a slightly better position than he was previously because of the army trade and because he's like continually expanding across the map and like securing positions for himself, making sure he doesn't die out. And that's basically what Taesa was in a standard late game CVT. But you go to the chaotic CVT, he was actually a master of that. He played Life. I forget the exact map, but basically here's what happens. Life realizes at the early game that Taesa's position upon the map is too strong. His it was like his Bio Thor Hellbat, I think that's what he was running at the time, was right on the steps of Life's base, and Life realizes, okay, I can maybe roll a 50-50, but if I base trade this guy, there's a high chance I will win. That's what Life was thinking. And the reason Life was thinking this is because in every other situation against every other Terran, if he base trades there, he will almost always win. And the reason he will almost always win is because he's the best chaotic player we've ever seen. He understands how the situation will play out once everything goes to shit. The only player that's equal to him was actually Taesa, and he didn't realize this at the time. So what happens is they base trade, but like there's a bunch of mines littered throughout life space, but like Taesa's smart enough to clear them with scans. And then at the very end, where it seems like it's about even, Taesa does this amazing move where he checkmates Life, where he's like, okay, I've killed all your drones, I've killed all your hatcheries, now watch this. He takes his CC, moves it into the center of the map, and then just builds a wall around it, and then moves his army there. And then Life is done. Like, he can't do anything else. Like Life's like chaotic situation ends because Taesa outthinks him there. And Taesa does the same thing in Protoss against Zest, and Zest obviously one of the all-time great players. This was back in Zest's prime even, where like Zest and Taesa do the same. Taesa this time is in Life's position, where it's pretty clear that Zest is about to win with his all-in attack, and what Taesa does is just like base trades, and it instantly creates like this chaotic situation. But unlike Taesa, Zest makes the wrong choice in where he positions his final base, and that's why he loses, even though he was at the time a player people considered the best in the world. And then you have to go to, I think, one of his all-time great ZVTP plays. It was against Rain, like a guy who I just said was the best late game player, but the best late game player couldn't deal with Taesa at like the peak of his powers, and that was the season 1 finals of 2013. And this is an amazing game because Taesa gets an early lead, and then this is usually fine for Rain. Like I said, Rain's a guy's like, yeah, take my handicap, beat me in the early game, beat me in the mid game, I'm gonna win anyway. That's Rain's philosophy in a nutshell. Taesa's like, okay, I will, and then he like cancels Rain's third pretty early, and then instead of doing what normal Terrans do, where they like try to batter the Protoss into winning before they get to the end game, where like the max army composition is super annoying to deal with for most Terran players, Taesa's like, okay, go ahead, take your third. And the reason he does that is because he doesn't want... Taesa's entire philosophy is something like, I could win maybe a 90% chance here, but if I'm guaranteed the 100% chance later on, I will take the 100% chance later on. That's how I think of Taesa's philosophy towards the game in late game. And so what happens is he slowly drains out Rain, despite the fact that Rain gets to 3 bases. Like, I think that game, what he does is he basically cuts off all vision for Rain across the map, so Rain doesn't know what to do because he can't position his army correctly. I think there were like 30 plus observers that were killed in that single game. And then eventually what happens is like Taesa cracks Rain. Like this is the only time in like Rain's career in a late game where Rain is super impatient. He's like, fuck it, I'm gonna go fight. And Taeja's like, yeah, that's what I thought. And then Taesa beats him. So that's like, it was an absolute masterclass from Taesa. And then of course, the other one that I think was amazing, same tournament, it was against Innovation on Newkirk. And this was an absolute masterclass again by Taesa in the late game where this was, I'll go ahead and say it. I think Innovation in 2013 was a better player than he is now. Just in terms of mechanics, I will say his understanding of the game, his ability to deal with pressure is better now than it was back then. But I think in terms of pure skill, I think he was better back then. That's just my opinion. But during that time, the two of them played head to head, and it was a late game TVT, and Innovation went with Mech, Taesa went with Bio, and I thought about this for a long time, and I think it's because Bio is just a better, has better mobility, so it emphasizes Taeja's ability to play the map positionally compared to Mech. At least this was that was the case. There are like a bunch of weird factors depending on the map as to which one is better or not, but that's how you think about it. And so the two of them play it out, and the two of them, it's super even throughout the entire thing. They're going back and forth. They're counterattacking, attacking. They're trading bases, constantly expanding. They're both playing out of their fucking minds. This is among the best, or I actually think this is the best StarCraft 2 game I've ever seen. And at the very end of this game, Taesa does something that I think nobody realizes the significance of, because we're going to like the 40 or 50 minute mark, but this isn't a normal 40 or 50 minute game, because this is a game that has been, the two of them have been fighting for the control of the map the entire like 40 minutes. But Taesa realizes something, like, because he has been sending out his Marines and counterattacking the entire time, he has slowly whittled down the count of the Viking count of Innovation to none. And Innovation doesn't realize how important the Viking count is, because he's only running like tanks Hellbats or tanks Hellbats medevacs to like counterattack, right? But Taesa realizes, okay, I will be that player. I will be the player who will make a Banshee at that 50th minute mark, and then I will win. Because not only is he taking, both players are thinking on an extremely high level in this game. They're thinking economically, how do I secure the next basis for my resources? They're thinking positionally, where do I fight? Where do I go? They're counterattacking and reacting to each other's moves. But Taesa is the guy who goes a step further. He realizes he's counting your unit ties, he's counting your unit compositions, and he's like, a Banshee wins me this game. He makes a Banshee and he wins the game. That's how that's how amazing Taesa was back then. And overall, I'd have to say, I think Taesa is the best late game player we've ever seen in StarCraft 2, and probably the best we will likely ever see, just because it's just because of the games he played during the times he played them. Like, I think I give the nod to Taesa as the best late game player we've ever seen. All right, see you later.